I honestly think that as soon as a stablecoin bill passes Congress, you will see a massive dramatic shift within like 2 to 5 years of like US converting from current financial systems to crypto-based ones. Everyone knows this technology is better, it's easier, like all the APIs are easier, and like we can start actually using these technologies. I think it'll explode.
All right, welcome to the 1000X podcast. We've got a very special guest for everybody today, Toly, one of the founders of Solana. And why do we have a guest this week? Well, because Jonah managed to make every single holder of Solana extremely irate a few days ago by drunk tweeting, in his words, why Solana is completely fucked. And so we wanted to have a conversation here to figure out, is that true? Is Solana completely fucked? But first, I kind of want to figure out, Jonah, where did that tweet come from?
Yeah. So first of all, Toly, thank you for being such a mature, good steward of your ecosystem and responding to me in, technical, thoughtful ways. And, thank you for coming on the podcast to discuss. Let me give you a little bit of an apologetic background. So I was on vacation with my wife in Rome. The kids were somewhere else, with their grandparents. Yeah, I had one of those sort of nights that you really don't get a lot when you're a parent. So, had a nice bottle of wine, feeling pretty happy about myself and that, my 24 hours of freedom. Now, my wife's pretty sick of listening to me talk about crypto. So after she passed out, I was like, you know what? I don't know if Solana's going to perform as well as ETH will in the next year. Let me talk to the internet about that. And no one cares what you say on the internet if you're not a little bit extreme. So I could have said, hey, Sol ETH is going to underperform a little bit if these things happen. But instead, I kind of went for it. I went aggressive, fell asleep. I wake up, and now literally everyone who still cares about crypto wants to fucking kill me. So for everybody out there, if you want to make people mad, suggest that Solana is in trouble.
Man, I am a dad myself, and I wouldn't spend my 24 hours free without from the kids thinking about crypto. I would.
This is why you are
something else. Yeah. But I appreciate that I was, that you had time to think about Solana. First of all, I hope like everyone that's listening can be like mature about these things. It's just the internet. People should post. If you ever actually meet those folks, even the worst shit posters in crypto Twitter, if you meet them, they're all nice people that you would totally be normally friends with and like grab beers or whatever. If that's your thing. So like, I hope people can step back whenever they get like too emotional in these discussions and just like, this is just literally people arguing about software.
And I'm not even as a guy. I have no business arguing about software. Yeah. Like I can write some crappy Python, and I think the most technical thing I ever did was write the electronic music for this podcast. But let me ask you a very simple question for non-technical folks out there about Solana. What is in a world where there's probably a little bit too much block space relative to the demand for crypto use cases right now, what's sort of the vision behind creating the world's fastest, cheapest blockchain? Like what use cases are you targeting with
this? There's this like, this is like a really good question because we don't know like at what point is the market saturated with block space? Are there use cases that are like unlocked at sub-cent transactions that are worthwhile for anyone? There might be, there might not. There's some indication of that. You look at like IoT stuff like Helium and HiveMapper. It would be really, really tough to do it in any other environment unless it's completely centralized running on a database. You kind of need like something like Solana for those. But could the world create those services in a completely centralized manner and be fine? And like life goes on, right? Like that's like another question. But like, I think there is this like general belief similar to people building open source software in the 90s that like I think if we build these systems in the decentralized way, they'll create more value in the long term for everyone else. Just like you could argue Windows has better features, as good as Linux, yada, yada, yada. But like for some reason in the 90s, I was motivated to spend my weekends working on open source software because I thought that it would be like a major benefit to myself as an engineer and to like the greater public and to all the other engineers I work with. So there's something to that. I think similarly, like if we can build decentralized systems, the hope is that they're less likely to get co-opted and turned into like the shitty version of the web that we have today. Like if Facebook was decentralized, if Google was decentralized, if all these like things were decentralized from the start, they might not suck as much, right? Like you might not have your data stolen all the time and sold. And like there's a bunch of benefits that come from that like diffusion of power and like robustness and reliability. And like that's the hope, right? And like every person has the option to go work at, like everyone in crypto that's like building stuff, they're solving real hard engineering problems. They all have the option to go work at Facebook, Google, Netflix, Microsoft, earn close to $1 million a year and just not give a shit. For some reason, they're choosing to do this. Some may choose it for the upside, but a lot of people are choosing it because it's more fun. Like you actually feel like you're fighting the David versus Goliath battle, right? Like you get to like push the hard technology forward. It's just more enjoyable for like a life's career goal to do that than to go like work on a giant Java database to optimize ads for Google, even though probably you'd make more money and will have better work-life balance and your kids spend more time with the kids, right? Like, but like we're here, right? Like we're trying to do something interesting. So in that sense, like there is like a lot of faith in that, like if we build the system, and what am I good at? I'm good at making things like hyper optimized and like efficient. If I apply all my talents into this and like make a really hyper efficient, lowest latency, cheapest cost blockchain, I think it'll open up new use cases and could be very disruptive, and that's cool. I don't know what it's going to be worth, right? Like if Solana is worth like 1/10 of what it is today, we just have smaller validators and features that take longer to ship because there'd be fewer core developers. But there'd still be people that are like, holy shit, this is fun to work on. I'm going to keep going at it. That's the only difference, right? Like the rest is kind of like up to the gods, you know, like PMF is really, really hard to find, really hard to predict. So what happens is really, really tough to know, like in the future.
That's actually something that I wanted to ask about, is that last little part there. Is it important to you to build in ways to generate value for Solana? It's like with ETH, right? They basically made the decision, we're going to introduce EIP 1559 specifically so that ETH could derive more value from activity on the chain. Is that something that you view as important?
All proof of stake networks, no matter how the tokens move inside the black box, all derive value the exact same way. There is a resource that people want, and if people want it enough in a short enough time, they will try to access it. And whether you have a burn or not, it doesn't really matter, because even without the burn, people bid up the fees, validators earn more rewards. That means that owning ETH to get more stake, to be a block producer more often, earns higher rewards. It's the same loop. Doesn't matter if it's burned or not. It's a nice meme to have it, the deflationary meme, and that's cool. But 1559 exists for a more technical reason. It's to prevent spam attacks in the ledger. Doesn't really matter. Like if you took away that technical reason, the value accrual to the Ethereum network is exactly the same. It's from like people demanding access to block space and like bidding for it just to such heights that it's significant. Now that's harder for that to occur in Solana because we have localized fee markets, and that's slowly happening in Ethereum because L2s are separating state, and each L2 has its own fee markets. So you can think of each L2 as kind of this generic blob that has its own fees. Those fees now don't really accrue to Ethereum outside of like the L2 data fees. So like you're already seeing kind of this happening in Ethereum. And the question that everyone should have in their mind, some point, I don't know when, Ethereum will also fix its block space problem, and its block space is going to be much, much higher, probably to the point that the fees to access the data itself, just submitting bytes to the network, are kind of commoditized. There should be like no more than like, 2-3x the cost of the hardware, maybe 5x, but like a small multiple of the cost of the hardware. Hardware is really cheap, like really, really cheap.
It's interesting because I remember, in the early days of Solana, the hardware to run a validator was super expensive, right? Like, what would it cost? What was the cost of one box?
Yeah, when we started, it was about 1,100 a month. Then it dropped to 800. Now it's about 350. My guess is within a year, probably sub 200 a month.
So let's say that Firedancer ships and it's a big success. What'll it cost to run a validator?
Yeah, Firedancer is far more efficient than the Labs client. So we'll see like how it actually performs. But the problem is that like you're also like when you get like a box at a data center, you're paying for the machine, the cores, the memory, and the bandwidth and the electricity. And like the cost of the cores and that kind of stuff, where efficiency of the code has the highest impact, is like 1/4 of the overall cost, right? So like Firedancer could be like 10 times more efficient. The price of that box drops by like 20%, right? That's it, right? Like, so you get some benefits, but not all the benefits. So you need like, it's like a Amdahl's law kind of problem. When you have like a bunch of things to optimize, you make the cost of one zero, the other things become the dominant factors, and you don't see like the same improvement across the overall thing, right? It would be really awesome to see once Firedancer's out, what kind of performance they could get on the same hardware. And I suspect it's going to be much, much better, but we'll see. So what I'm excited about, like Firedancer coming out, is obviously safety. We have 2 clients, most of the top validators that have a lot of stake. The hardware costs of them are insignificant. They should be running both clients at the same time, and like one primary, one secondary. So if there's a bug in one, they fail over to the other one. That's a massive improvement in reliability. If they diverge on state, they halt. That means there's a system-wide bug. Hopefully that never happens, but that's like, I will be able to sleep at night because we go from like catastrophic safety bugs being like a potential like death of the network to just being a liveness issue. Most suck, but those are recoverable from. Again, hopefully it never happens, but like that's a massive, massive improvement. And like once you have 2 clients, it's easier to build a third and a fourth, and there's already a team working on the third one.
Very quickly, the Firedancer is being built by a trading company. It's being built by Jump. I've never worked at Jump, but I've worked at Goldman, I've worked at VTOL, I've worked at DRW. Like I know that trading companies are not altruistic entities, and I know how they operate. They're pretty Machiavellian. So let's say that Firedancer is a huge technical success and it decreases the cost of block space and everything that you just mentioned works smoothly. And suddenly, machines all over the world are running Firedancer, and it's the go-to validator client for Solana. How should users feel about the fact that the go-to software validating blocks is, invented by a company that's clearly got some incentive, right, to build this? They're not doing it for free.
Yeah. So this is what's cool. The trading companies are actually are mutually aligned with the idea of a giant transparent state machine that would be competing with centralized exchanges. So when you right now connect to NASDAQ, to get high performance connection, you got to pay them an arm and a leg. Every trade and everything you submit, you can keep track of your data, but they keep all the data and then they charge you to get the data back. So you pay them an arm and a leg to connect, you pay them an arm and a leg to read the data, and it's available only to the top traders. And to be part of that network, it's very expensive, and it's opaque, it's transparent to them. This is an open system run by volunteers. That means that anyone in the world that pays for a hunk of metal can go and connect and be in the same level playing field as Jump. And to them, that's great. They just have more competition, that they get to compete in an open environment. Their connectivity is free, right? It's the hunk of metal. The data is available to everyone. They get to like grind out a profit based on their like algorithms and like know-how and stuff like that, without this additional man in the middle, this NASDAQ or NYSE that's taking a rake. That's a huge win for every trading company. So in a lot of ways, like this was
They're doing this to attract volume to the network, basically.
They're doing this because the vision is aligned with removing an extractive man in the middle in finance, which is like these centralized entities that run markets. It'd be better if they were all decentralized markets, because that's an open space where they're competing without paying these like astronomical fees to like, what value does like an exchange provide? It's just a bunch of boxes somewhere that you connect to, right? That's it. Like, why do they get to make so much money for running a market? Like, you got to ask yourself that.
Yeah, I mean,
like,
exchanges are very valuable businesses,
but like they don't take any risk. Like Jump actually takes capital and risks it, right? They like try to synthesize all of the world's information and predict the future. That's really, really hard. And Exchange doesn't do that. They just run a market and say, here, I'm going to take a trade from you and a trade from you, and I'm going to take a cut in the middle. You guys do all the work, I get paid, right? Like this is like, if this works, right? If we can get a decentralized system to be basically like bound by physics, like we remove all the bottlenecks, and Solana is now like globally distributed, information's propagating it at the speed of light, there would be no arbitrage between the state on Solana and state on NASDAQ. Like that's a really, really cool outcome. So like that's the dream, that's the goal. I think that's aligned with Jump because it will literally cut costs for them. Like over the long term, it's like Google investing in Linux because they see Microsoft making a shitload on Windows and being like, if we invest in Linux, it's a free OS. It might take a chunk out of this like big competitor that's kind of extracting a lot of value from us.
So I know this is like a big narrative in 2021, was Solana as the basis for a lot of financial transactions and for the places that an exchange could go build that DeFi might get really, really huge on, and then you get the financial system rebuilt on Solana. I think realistically, post the FTX implosion, because FTX was a big supporter of that narrative, that sort of died a bit. And on Solana, you started to see activity on NFTs and gaming, and people were starting to pay attention. Oh, well, maybe it's not going to be, used for that, but it's going to be used for, at the NFTs were blowing up at the time. So my question to you is, on the financial side, what has happened over the last year or 18 months that people might not be paying attention to that is proving out that you're getting closer to everything that you just described? Because there were a lot of roadblocks there.
I think like the hardest part has been like grinding for TVL and volume. Those are really, really tough businesses to run. Like we're like, I'm heads down optimizing the network, but there's like startups like Phoenix, like Margin, Phi, like Drift, Zeta, etc., that are like running these like systems that are doing all sorts of trading environments, running markets, and are grinding for PMF and competing across the board, right, in the bear market with everyone else for traders and stuff. And they're slowly growing. You see like Phoenix, I don't know if you guys look at Ellipsis, the central limit order book that was built by a couple engineers like over the last 6 months. Their volume to TVL ratio is like 30 times higher than Uniswap's. It's just insane how efficient they are. And this is because it's a highly optimized central limit order book. Like the compute costs on it are like way, way more faster even than Serum and like the old school central limit order book. It's easier to use for devs, and they've done like a meticulous job optimizing that. They just like, they've been doing a really amazing job, but the volumes are still small. Like we're talking like 1 to 5 million per day. So these are tiny things, but are like not zero, right? Like that are growing. It's really tough to compete with Ethereum there, because the way that Ethereum DeFi works is that people deposit a bunch of tokens that they don't want to sell, that they kind of have a very long position on and collect yield on them. And they just kind of sit there. They're not optimizing for capital efficiency. They're just optimizing for long-term preservation of like that exposure, right, to that coin or that thing. So if you're like a big Aave holder, you don't really care like how much it costs for how much your capital could be gaining somewhere else, right? Because you're not going to sell your tokens, right? You're just going to keep them.
Yeah.
You're going to deposit them in that protocol. You're going to keep them there and get whatever yield you can get because you're like maximally aligned with that. And Ethereum being first and kind of leading DeFi summer and generating so much like market cap across the board there is really, really tough to compete.
Produce like a one click. You should move your TVL from an Aave to an equivalent on Solana. I always wondered why more people don't go down that path of trying to, make it just really, really, really easy to port over activity.
Yeah, I think like Jupiter actually is working on some of that, like on working on like bringing like bridges and stuff like that are instant on-demand bridge liquidity that you don't have to worry about like where it's coming from. You just kind of click one button. Yeah, people are like, the pieces are there. People are starting to realize that's a way to attract users and grow their business, and they're adding those user like UX improvements. Everyone is fighting for this, like all the L2s, etc., right? Like everyone is trying to find like what is a product that I can build to attract traders, which is kind of a fixed number right now because it's maybe we're not in the bear market anymore, but like we are not really in the bull market either, right? We might be shifting. The winds are shifting potentially, but like that's a zero-sum game where everyone's PvPing each other for that like activity.
We
And,
get a
like,
bad rep, Toli. No one wants to be like us.
yeah.
Not an attractive space. But I hear you on the attracting TVL and attracting flow thing. I mean, we and I go back and forth on this. My sort of geopolitical view on crypto is that in its current form, crypto is a fantastic solution for emerging markets. It provides dollarized, checking accounts, banking. You can earn yield on your dollars. If you live in a place like Argentina or Iran or Venezuela, you can effectively have a US dollar bank account. However, I think a lot of the developer activity in the West, at the cutting edge is focused on applications that aren't necessarily needed in the West. So I think it would be kind of an interesting thought exercise for people building financial applications on a chain like Solana to, think about how could I just create basic DeFi primitives that are beautiful and easy to use for people who actually need them. I'm not sure the market is ready for like a central limit order book for options trading yet.
I honestly think that as soon as a stablecoin bill passes Congress, you will see a massive dramatic shift within like 2 to 5 years of like US converting from current financial systems to crypto-based ones. Like I think there is just a massive regulatory roadblock right now. Everyone knows this technology is better. It's easier, like all the APIs are easier. I don't know if you've ever been a dev and tried to like connect to PayPal or Stripe. It's like a pound of flesh in a firstborn to like deal with the mess of setting up like merchant. Like it's much easier, but like it still sucks compared to like I just generate an address with a private key and I'm good to go. Right? Like that's it.
What technical perspective is that? Is it a technical issue or is it that they don't want to make it easy?
The networks, the way that the US financial systems work are all around these like compliance silos, like around AML and stuff. And like credit cards are kind of like the way that you interact with users. But credit cards themselves are bizarre. Like when I do a credit card transaction, it's equivalent to me sharing my private key with the merchant.
Yeah.
and then there's like this massive process to like figure out if the merchant did somebody stole the private key in the process and did an invalid transaction. It's bizarre. Right? Like if you step back for a second and be like, what? Who would build this? So like there's a lot of problems with how this stuff works right now in the US, and it's all based on like KYC AML silos. If and when we get a stablecoin bill and like we can start actually using these technologies, I think it'll explode. You'll have like your bank accounts will take USDC deposits across a bunch of networks, like just like exchanges do, and like people that will like kind of forget about wires and all this other stuff.
So what are you doing to make sure that stablecoin activity occurs on Solana? And why is Solana better than Ethereum for stablecoin usage?
Well, it's cheaper and faster, and there's some use cases where that matters, like checkout UX, especially like coffee shops, like settlement where you're like waiting in a line behind people. You really don't want to wait 20 seconds, right? Like for stuff to clear. Fees are also kind of a suck. Like if it's a bad out, like it for the middle class in the United States, they're not going to care about extra 20, 30 cents or a dollar. But like if you're talking about an aggregate, it's a really bad outcome to shift to a technology that is an aggregate more expensive for finance, because this touches everyone in the US. And like it's a regressive tax. It's just like not everything about like technology is like supposed to reduce costs, make stuff more efficient, right? And better. So like I don't see Congress being super supportive of something that increases financial costs, like for the majority of Americans. Like something in Solana definitely will decrease it, right? You can do like a trade on Jupiter that'll multi-route a trade for like 5-cent trade because it can touch 50 different markets and find you the most liquidity across a bunch of markets for 5 cents without incurring any additional fees.
That's
So,
actually
like,
a really good response to and sort of a criticism I had in my shit post, which is sort of like, finance settles T+2. So high value Wall Street transactions settle T+2. So I've kind of always thought, who gives a fuck whether it settles in 13 seconds or 400 milliseconds? It's still just a massive improvement. You're saying for low value transactions, it matters massively.
Yeah, like
you're absolutely right. I didn't think of it that way.
Credit card checkout has to be done under 2.5 seconds, and the fees have to be cheap enough to where like it's cheaper than it's like comparable to Visa's like internal infra costs of all their databases and stuff, to where like if they switch their infra to this, their bottom line does not get impacted, right? Like because they're a profit-driven company, they're never going to do it if their costs go up by 10. They will get skewered by every Democrat out there if the human costs go up, like to their consumers go up by a factor of 10. Like there's just no way that would fly. And like that's a bad outcome. Like everyone should kind of intuitively agree that like finance is moving numbers around computers. It's a regressive tax on the entire economy. It should be as cheap as possible. Like that's a win for like the entire world if we reduce those costs.
I mean, I think Visa also just sees the writing on the wall that business model is going to be very tough moving
they're
forward.
Awesome. The providing credit and underwriting risk and stuff like that, that's real value. You got to do work. You got to figure out like how to manage that. That's awesome. Like I hope they thrive and like create like massive success for everyone, and like have like an awesome way for me to get credit USDC right when I need it in like a very simple way out of my wallet, and that would be awesome. So like I hope they crush it. And but like we need this stuff to actually be, for this stuff to go mainstream, it's really, really hard for it to happen in the US until there is some actual stablecoin legislation. It's coming. They'll do everything else before they do the right thing, but eventually they'll do the right thing.
So you're playing the long game here. And I think I heard on another podcast that you're talking to Visa a little bit.
The foundation has worked with them. Visa did a bunch of research across a bunch of different blockchains, and they like Solana's performance and costs is comparable to their infra costs. And like they are exploring, basically, I think, launching a whole cross-border remittance program using USDC on Solana. And remittance is like an obvious win where you're like competing with like Swift fees and a whole bunch of other shit with like 50 different banks to hop between like 82 points versus using USDC. It's just like such a direct win that it's so obvious that everything should run on crypto for like cross-border stuff, that it feels like from their perspective that it's such a better technology that they can actually like gain market share and like prove this out as like a win, right? Like for the company. That's really, really cool. It's still like, I think people need to be like cautiously optimistic. We need to see these big companies get like at least like 2 to 3% of their revenue coming from crypto activity. Like a legitimate US financial company that's not crypto native, so not talking about Coinbase, but like anyone, PayPal or whatever, Visa, once they get like a few percentages of their revenue coming from crypto activity, that means that their shareholders are going to care, right? The boards are going to care. They're going to start investing more into it. And like, that's the snowball that's actually going to get us to like mainstream adoption. We don't have to get like 20% right out of the bat, but like just a few percentage points is significant.
So the road to those few percentage points, I think, you as the core engineer of Solana and the traders and investors who are long Solana tokens have very aligned incentives, right? Because the worst case scenario is the same for both the traders and the devs, which is a network outage in the middle of this, or a severe network outage in the middle of this, period of sunlight and progress. So the stuff that keeps you up at night is probably the same thing that keeps you, Solana token holders up at night, which is what's going to happen the next time the network gets bowled over, if ever. So how do you feel about, last year's issue being in the review mirror? Do you feel confident? Is Firedancer part of that? Like what makes you confident that the future is going to look better than the past?
Well, like the past issues were all centered around like basically one design decision that we just didn't think hard enough on, but it's obvious in retrospect when we launched. And this is to do with hotspots and like kind of those like kind of very large demand spikes. For folks that don't know, basically Solana is a parallel virtual machine called SVM. It runs stuff in parallel. It's very, very cool. It's the bee's knees. So it can do many things at once, but there's other parts of the system that don't do everything at once. And you can think of one part of that system is like when you get a bunch of transactions and you decide what to run in parallel, like the block producer, the leader, like in Solana, there's no mempool. So the block producer gets as many connections from different clients and just receives a shitload of transactions and then tries to find the best parallel ones to run in SVM. Well, before we had priority fees and this like idea of localized fee markets, when there was a hot NFT mint, botters would like create as many machines as they could around the internet, and they would all submit transactions trying to be first to be in that NFT mint. So many that it would like exceed the physical limits of what these machines could process, sometimes like hitting like 20, 40 gigabits per second of data. So we had to fix that problem, which was switching to Quick, which is a Google an internet standard built by Google, designed for this kind of low latency communication, but with the ability to do flow control. So that works out. The second part is that like, even if you switch to Quick and you get a bunch of transactions, you don't want botters to create a shitload of machines and then just all be the only ones submitting data, because you're still dealing with a big pile of connections. So then we had this idea to do quality of service, where if you have some stake, you're guaranteed a certain amount of traffic. If you don't have any stake, you have a best effort on every machine that has stake to take some of their bandwidth, right? And give it to non-stake nodes. So if you have like an entire network of 2,200 Solana validators, each one of them allocates 10% of their bandwidth to non-stake nodes. You would have to attack all of them at the same time to prevent any non-stake transactions from going through, right? So that's a cool solution. And then once you get all this data, you got to sort it. And this is where the localized fee markets come in, where the way that SVM works, the way it creates parallelism is that developers have to work a little harder in Solana. They have to tell the network which parts of the state they're going to read, which parts of the state they're going to write. You can think of these states as like buckets. And when you start creating transactions, you take the most expensive ones and you start filling up buckets based on the state they touch. And as soon as one bucket is full, you basically delay all the transactions that touch that bucket, and you fill up and you continue pulling the highest expensive ones as long as it doesn't touch that full bucket, right? Does that make sense? Okay, you can kind of visualize this, right? Every transaction has a bunch of stuff in it. You put the stuff in buckets. As soon as one is full of shoes or whatever, you can't take any more transactions with shoes. The shoe mint is full.
How do you decide when something is full? What does full mean in that context?
This comes from even if you have parallelism, when something all wants to mint the same NFT, they're all touching the same state, and you cannot parallelize that. There's nothing you can do. No zero knowledge magic, no L2. It's called a database hotspot. Everybody wants the exact same thing. There's no solution to this. So the only thing you can do is you can limit it. So there is only a certain amount of transactions that can touch the same state in a block that can be scheduled. But a block can have many multiples of these. So you can have 5 different hotspots or whatever, or 4. So if there's a hotspot, like a hot NFT mint, you fill up that hotspot first with the highest paying transactions that all want to touch that NFT mint, and then you're done. Anything else that's wants that NFT mint is delayed.
Yeah, sir. I guess my question was a little bit more of, and this is just out of pure curiosity, is that concept of full orchestrated by the chain or the validator?
It's basically defined by the block, so you can think of it as part of EVM gas limits. We have single thread limits, we have account write limits. So if you have a single account that you're writing to, which is that NFT, the thing that defines that NFT mint, you have to fill it up to 12 million compute units, even though the block is 48 million compute units. But as soon as you hit 12, you can't add anything else. So you have all this other block space for all this other shit. So it's very rare that you have an NFT mint and a liquidation and all this other stuff in the same block. But that does happen, right, for now. But what's cool is that as the cost of hardware decreases every 2 years, we basically get twice as many cores for the same dollars. So that's all we need to add more hotspots, right? If you have 1 core that we're using for SVM for hotspot, next year we can have 2 cores, right? So now twice as many hotspots. We go from 4 to 8 to 16. And at some point, we will hit that. We will eventually, no matter what the load is, unless human activity for demand for block space goes up exponentially, which it doesn't. I wish it did, because then we'd have.
We think it will.
Yeah,
we think it will. We think it goes back and forth. We've debated this on the podcast before. Just as an oil trader, what happens is oil gets discovered in a location, and then you have to pipe it to refineries. Yep. But usually, when you discover oil, there are no pipes. So then there's this big race to build pipes, and the first person to build a pipe makes a bunch of money, and then pipes get overbuilt, and then pipe space drops to bargain basement prices, and all the pipeline companies go bankrupt, and then more oil is discovered, and then the pipeline companies resurrect themselves and make a bunch of money again. In a sense, blockchains are like that, because blockchains are the pipes, right? So some blockchains were built a while ago. People didn't really want to use them, and then suddenly 2021 happened, and everybody wanted DeFi and NFTs, and there wasn't enough block space, and now there's too much block space. It's just going to keep oscillating back and forth, in our opinion. And so we think we're primed for a huge cycle of block space demand, which is why it's interesting to talk to you're building it. You're literally laying the pipes. So,
I mean, that's the hope, and we'll see. And obviously I want that to happen too, but we need I don't know what those use cases are that will drive so much demand. You have stuff like Star Atlas, which is a game. They're doing more transactions per day than ETH, L1, or Polygon, right? It's just one game. The way they built it is to use the chain as much as possible for all their events. So stuff like this could explode, but the question is is it in the absence of block space, would Star Atlas still exist, and would the users care? And if the answer is yes, and the users wouldn't care, that still enjoy the game the same, then it's not like it's being filled up with like traffic that is like critical, right? Like it's not like the oil is being used for driving food and like growing food and like stuff that's really, really important. We're like burning it to mine Bitcoin, right? Like there's superfluous usage and then there's like required usage. I don't know if there's going to be so much required usage that we run out of block space.
See that kind of differently. It's almost like an intransigent minority situation where as long as you have enough requirement for block space, then you're going to have a lot of superfluous activity on that chain as well, because it's just going to work better to do everything in one place. It's like what I view the normal traditional systems that we use. There are some things that are required to be built in a certain programming language, and then there are certain things that are just done that way because there are certain things that are required to be built that way, right? And so it's it's sort of the goal is to just increase the amount of activity that's required in some capacity. But I think the reality is that the majority of it will be superfluous. Like it will be things that aren't necessarily required to be done on chain, but are done on chain purely because you get easier access to the things that are required. And that's a little bit of what I'm hoping for and what I'm looking for, is that you get these things that move over.
Eventually, block space is created by computers. Computers get twice as cheap every 2 years. It's going to increase no matter what, right? There's some weird like networks like Bitcoin where block space is fixed for religious reasons, but even like Ethereum post dank sharding, like the improvements that are landing in like maybe like 3-4 years, they will get them to a point where like they will be aligned with like hardware costs. It's just inevitable. So we're going into that future where like we're gonna have access block space. I don't know what we're gonna do with it. We'll see what happens.
So let's say that Avi's worst nightmare comes true, or favorite dream, I'm not sure which, and you have a bunch of superfluous block space getting consumed for no reason. So let's say that a bunch of people decide to spin up really basic computer games like Asteroid and Pong on Solana that just arbitrarily consume shit tons of block space. Is that siloing, fee hotspots mechanism you described earlier strong enough to withstand an onslaught of random crap like that?
Yep. Yeah, we saw that like live. There was a Helium IoT migration. They were minting like 1 million NFTs. Mad Lads launched at the same time, which was like a classic hotspot based mint. And then you had like a bunch of random stuff, oracles, all that stuff worked without a hitch. It's a matter of how many concurrent, like what's the network currently configured to, is like to handle about 4 of these concurrently. And that they may sound like a little, but like when you're talking about 400 millisecond kind of intervals, all 4 things happening at the same time around the world is very, very unlikely. Like it's just like really, really tough, right? Like most people like human time frames, oh, this all happened in the same half hour. That's like eons for a computer, right? Like that's not at the same time, right? Like so like we have enough, and like within 2 years, without doing anything, it'll be 8 simply because the cost of the hardware will drop. Validators can add more cores. And like, so from my perspective, like that's just kind of like the relentless march of progress in Moore's law. If that ever stops, we should all be building bunkers and like stocking booze and guns and not really worrying about crypto anymore, or only worrying about bunker coin.
I had a question about, just now that I've gotten introduced to your community via Twitter and how much they care. I wanted to ask.
Please be nice. I hope folks that are listening from Solana community, just be nice to people. It's cheap. Kindness is super cheap.
No, actually, I'm actually really impressed. Like I love your community. I had no idea that they were this passionate and committed. And I wanted to ask you, how do you build a community like that? Like you're obviously passionate about the technology, but I'm not an engineer. I'm not in these hackathons. I'm not in the room. Like how do you create this? So many L1s have tried and failed, but you've succeeded. Or basically everybody but Ethereum has failed.
Yeah, this is really weird. I think I have some instincts that I learned from being like an open source dev in the 90s and trying to like find other like-minded people that were like into like hacking and Linux over the weekend. You got to find like your niche, your nerds. And like I think you have to be like, you have to invest in building something that you're really interested in. And I'm really interested in optimizing this thing, and I can talk your ear off about like all the cool optimizations we can do. And people that are into that stuff can see that I'm really interested in it, and like I'm not trying to sell them on it. I'm just genuinely like a super performance nerd. And that's like, I think the start of it is you got to find like your tribe. How big that tribe is going to be, who the hell knows? But like, you got to be genuine and passionate. That's like, those are the key parts. And I would worry about those two above anything else and trying to grow it. I think where other things fall over is when like people try to do it in like some kind of artificial way. Like the earliest that we really started building a community is when we really needed the test net up and running. And it was a hard process. And weirdly, like stuff that adds friction in that community building part also creates stickiness for the tribe. We literally asked people, go find a local data center. Not a lot of people have done this. Go like get a box there and install it and set it up and like maintain it. And that's a very much higher friction thing than run a node on AWS. So the people that we were able to convince in those early days to go do that are obviously far more stickier than like people that ran in incentivized testnet nodes on AWS. They ran it once, got their points, and then left, right? Like if you actually spent the trouble building a computer, right, and like geeking out on specs and like calling your local like data center, right, that's like barely has a website, and like figure out that you can go put it there, you're gonna be committed, right? So that kind of like weird friction adds like creates like in some cases creates your tribe. You can't really make it like I don't think you can create it artificially. It just like there was a reason for that friction to exist because we really needed cheap egress, we needed cheap internet connectivity. There's no way you're going to get it in a cloud. So people like understood why they were doing it and like saw the positive outcome. And our tour de sol was very generous in terms of like tokens and stuff distribution. That I think created some like stickiness too.
Your community has stuck with you through some incredible
man
social volatility. Like I don't know if Shaquille O'Neal is into like high performance coding, but and name a list of celebrities have been in and out, and it's so fascinating to watch. I'm mystified and amazed by it, frankly.
Same. It is a mystery to me. I thought we were going to be dead like more than once. And like somehow like I think folks are sticking around and really see like the value of what we're doing, and it's awesome.
Speaking of building something awesome, if you had to guess what Solana's product market fit is going to look like in 1 to 5 years, is it the phone? Is it DeFi? Is it something else? Like what do you think is going to be the next big smash hit?
I hope it's like something like Helium, where they have like $5 data plan, IoT devices that are like doing the whole crypto economic loop, right? There's demand here, they give you more rewards, the more boxes show up. It's awesome. Like I think as from like a 50-foot view, it's like the perfect like application of crypto that's creating value for like end consumers. That everyone that I talk to, every like congressperson that I talk to, like, look, it's a $5 data plan. They're like, that's good. That's good for my constituents. That's good for everyone.
So I love it too. Why the fuck hasn't it caught on yet? What's going on there? Like I've loved it for a long time.
Have you used it? Is it usable in a meaningful way?
In Miami, it's usable. You get $5 data. It's backs to T-Mobile, so you can't tell whenever it's like using T-Mobile connection or that one. So they're rolling it out. I hope they can go national soon, and we'll see if they can like take a bite out of like a big national provider. So that's one of those. Like Hive Mapper's another one, but that's more like harder to think about. It's like mapping data that they're collecting. Like you could, off their data set, build a Google Street View competitor, or like train, like Tesla trains cars, you can train like AI. So there's like a bunch of cool, really in products you can build on top, but it's not as like visceral, like as like reducing costs for mobile. I want to see more stuff like Helium. I don't know what that is, but I really want to point to like something that my parents can use and tell them, if you use a Solana and it's cheaper or better than some alternative. So like, I think with finance and banking, it's going to take a while. It's clearly better, but like, I don't know, maybe within 5 years, Congress passes a law. Within 5 years, we have like USDC based wallet accounts with yields. It's better than banking because you never get overdraft fees. You never get monthly fees. You have all this transparency and stuff. That could be like, I think, an easy one to point to. But that one, it's just like law and finance is, my theory is that like we're going through the process of like software eating the world, right? Like natural process. It's now starting to eat places where governments and humans have wanted control, right? Like finance is very attached to government, and it's like there's a lot of tension there, right? Like people don't want to give up control over stuff, but like it's inevitable. Like within 50 years, can you imagine like banks still run by like 10,000 people, like trying to figure out all this stuff by hand? Like it's so crazy, right? Like
There's no way.
Yeah.
They're fighting it pretty hard right now.
Yeah.
I mean, just to your point about finance, the fact that a financial transaction settles in 2 days for, typical 2 business days, not even calendar days, for for a high value, Wall Street type trade is incredible to me. In the world of zero interest rates, who cares? But, if your short-term interest rate is above 5%, trillions of dollars of capital are being held up all over the world for 2 days. If you could just let that out, how much value could be created? In theory, a Solana could do that if it just replaced existing financial infrastructure. But like you said, there's some people who don't want that out there. So when you talk to Congress people and regulators, especially in the wake of what happened with SBF, making everyone upset about all of this, how do you cool the jets in Washington?
I mean,
how do you explain
first of all, a lot of folks are super smart that are involved in government. That may not seem like it. They're very smart, but there's also a lot of politics, and politics is populism. It's like trying to build a narrative, and like sometimes it's kind of stupid. Like people try to like snipe each other or whatever. That's the theater of it. But under the hood, very, very smart people are trying their best, right? Because they have to like fight these other counter narratives and like stay relevant and all this stuff and raise money. It's a system that's very competitive. So like I'm very bullish on it as being like a robust system to get the right people eventually to do the right thing. I think it's much, much better than like any alternatives out there. But it takes time. So the most important narrative you can show folks is like, this is like a product that your voters will actually benefit from. Helium is like my go-to example. The finance ones are harder because you have like Wall Street Journal will publish a totally incorrect estimate of how much terrorist activity uses crypto, and then you got to be like, no, that was wrong.
Yep.
Here's all the counterpoints. This is why using a public immutable ledger is the dumbest place to do any kind of crime. And then they get it. They need like those bullet points and stuff. And then there's like people with like Warren, I think, I don't know. I don't know what's driving her internally. I'm actually quite curious to find out why she's so anti-crypto. Is it because this is her base of power is the financial committee, and that she wants appointees that can have human control over the banks, or does she really believe that there's value that is being created there for like consumers? Like, we got to figure that out, and that part I don't know yet. But most people are smart. crypto is a technology. They get the benefit of it. You can explain those benefits, and eventually the right thing will happen. It just takes time.
Speaking of the right thing winning, I wanna wrap up by asking you, why is Solana gonna crush Ethereum in your mind? Why is Solana the right thing? Why is Solana the right thing to win?
Crush is like, it's very, that part I don't know. Like, I think like Ethereum had awesome success. It was first to market with a smart contract, and now their momentum is driving them towards a particular part in this Pareto efficient curve of trade-offs of what a layer one blockchain should look like. They cannot change themselves to Solana, right? Like it'd be really, really hard for Ethereum to rewrite everything and become Solana, right? Like just the way that the ecosystem's moving, that piece of code and everything else, they're moving towards this like multi-layer model. It's fine, right? We also like, because of the way my brain works and my passion, how I like kicked off the project, Solana's moving into a different spot in that Pareto efficient curve. We're going to build a single layer one that's can host as many applications as possible, to the point that it should be more expensive for you to take an app and run it on your own app chain than to use Solana. It should be like economically irrational to do that. People will still do it for other reasons, but there should be no economic reason to do that. Which one wins, who the hell knows? This is up to the PMF gods, the whatever, right? Like, I don't see a world where like somehow Ethereum loses and Solana wins because of that. I think you're going to see like probably ebbs and flows of some applications being built on Solana, some on Ethereum, and stuff will shift. And who knows, maybe Solana will be 90% of the world's transactions will happen on Solana, but 90% of the TVL will be on Ethereum. Who won? I don't know, right? Like you cannot really tell what that is. My core thing is that like people are using the chain, they're building apps on it, they're building stuff that consumers want and like creating value. If we get that right, we have a shot of beating Ethereum, crushing them, right? Like whatever.
Yeah, I asked it in the most inflammatory way possible, but I like the sentence that I can now quote tweet and just tell everybody you said, which is, you're economically irrational if you use Ethereum. I'm just going to
No, I said it's economically irrational to use an app chain versus running an app on Solana.
It's gonna get more retweets the other way.
Love it. Okay, do it. You can say that.
No, totally. I really appreciate you spending the time with us today. This was, I mean, you know, I sat here and I listened for most of it, but I feel like I learned a ton.
For sure.
Just hearing you speak, and Jonah had some great questions in there. So, you know,
thank you for sharing a really well articulated vision with us, Toly. I learned a lot too. I'm
appreciate it.
Kind of blown away. I've got to go back to the drawing board now.
Thank you guys for having me. We're all working in open source software. We're all kind of on the same side. So like all the details don't really matter over the long term.